Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're going to set the stage for a deep dive into something I find just completely fascinating, the psychology of sudden wealth. I mean, we've all had those daydreams of striking it rich overnight, right? But the reality of what a sudden massive windfall actually does to the human mind is complex, it's surprising, and honestly, it's often entirely counterintuitive. So I want you to start by asking yourself a question. Seriously, pause and imagine this for a second. You're walking down the street, just minding your own business, and you look down to find a bag filled with $100,000 in cold, hard cash. No one is watching. What is the very first thing you do? It's super fun to daydream about for sure, but for a few individuals, this isn't just some hypothetical thought experiment, it's actual reality.
Okay, let's dive right into this. We aren't actually going to start with $100,000, but rather a very real, very tangible $10,000. That is exactly the amount written on a dropped check that a homeless man named Elmer Alvarez found lying on a busy street corner. He was struggling, living out in the cold, and then suddenly, bam! He's holding a massive sum of money in his hands.
Section 1, the ultimate moral test.
You know, unexpected money rarely just acts as financial relief. It almost always acts as a really profound moral test for whoever finds it. It strips away all our excuses and basically forces us to look in the mirror. Just consider the incredible integrity of Elmer Alvarez. After discovering that dropped check, the guy didn't hesitate. He didn't try to cash it, he didn't use it as leverage to get a reward. Instead, he took it entirely upon himself to track down the rightful owner, who turned out to be a successful real estate agent named Roberta Hosky. He met up with her, handed it back, and expected absolutely nothing in return. Despite living on the streets, his moral compass literally did not waver for a single second.
When people asked him why he did it, Elmer simply said, might as well just do the right thing and just look for the person and just return the check. It's so incredibly humble, almost casual, but this simple act completely moved Roberta Hosky to tears. And there's this beautiful twist here. Roberta herself was once a homeless teenage mother and a high school dropout who had to survive on just $417 a month because she knew exactly what it was like to be in his shoes. Elmer's good deed resonated with her on a deeply, deeply personal level. Section 2, the undercover millionaire. Now, Elmer's story isn't just an isolated incident. We actually see a really clear pattern of honesty rewarded across our sources. First, we have Anaya, a young girl living in poverty who finds a wallet. She returns it to an old man who desperately needed it for his wife's surgery. Because of her honesty, the community rallied together to donate money for Anaya's own sick father. Then we have Emma, a super kind waitress who offered free coffee to a homeless man every single morning, only to find out he was actually an undercover millionaire named Daniel Carter. Daniel rewarded her empathy by buying an abandoned building and letting Emma run it as a full-fledged homeless shelter. And of course, Elmer, who we just talked about, wound up receiving housing and job training from Roberta. In all these scenarios, sudden wealth wasn't an accident. It was a direct reward for making a beautiful, selfless moral choice.
Section 3, the $100,000 experiment.
All right, we're going to pivot a bit here. Filmmaker Wayne Powers was living in LA, and he was constantly being asked for money by the homeless. He started to genuinely wonder what would happen if he just straight up gave a homeless person $1 million. Would it change their life for the better, or would it make it worse? The network executives actually talked him down from $1 million to $100,000. But the core of this radical social experiment remained totally intact. A massive, no-strings-attached cash drop.
The subject they chose for this experiment was a guy named Ted Rodriguez. Ted was 45 years old and had been homeless for 2 full decades. He had definitely been dealt a really bad hand in life, growing up with an alcoholic mother, spending most of his 20s in prison. At the time of the experiment, he survived on about $20 a day just by recycling cans. But here is the most fascinating part of his profile. Ted was actually generally content. He liked that he didn't have a boss, he really cherished his bicycle, and he completely understood how to survive on the streets.
So to set up the experiment, the filmmakers first made absolutely sure Ted passed a drug and psychiatric screening. Then, instead of just walking up and handing him a check, they literally hid a briefcase filled with crisp $20 and $50 bills in a dumpster they knew he searched every day. When Ted found it, he actually thought it was drug money at first, but the filmmakers stepped in, explained the situation, and told him the money was 100% his to keep. They offered him access to a financial advisor, but importantly, and this is key, they didn't force him to use one, and they absolutely did not interfere with his spending.
Section 4, the curse of sudden wealth.
To really understand Ted's reaction to this windfall, we have to look at a known psychological phenomenon. Financial advisor Sean Burke notes that this, often called the lottery curse, hits people who acquire fortunes suddenly without having any prior money management skills. And the result? They make incredibly poor choices. They burn through the money, they alienate their loved ones, and they very often end up in a much worse mental state than they were before they struck it rich.
Charting Ted's downfall reveals this tragic, honestly unbelievable timeline. At first, on day one, he's remarkably restrained. He just buys a nice new bike and rents a modest motel room. You'd think, okay, he's off to a sensible start. But by month one, word gets out. He starts paying off all his friends' debts and dating lavishly, adopting this, frankly absurd, bang-him-and-leave-him policy as women suddenly flock to him for his cash. By month three, despite his own family literally begging him to save some of it and get a job, he ignores his financial advisor entirely. He blows $34,000 on a truck and furnishes a luxury apartment like he's some kind of rock star. And by month six, just 6 months later, you guys, Ted was completely bankrupt, deep in debt, and back sleeping on the streets.
Ted actually went on national television later and admitted something incredibly telling. He said, "You never think that the money is going to run out." Because he had spent his whole life purely surviving day to day, he completely lacked any sort of future planning skills. And the saddest part of the whole thing? Once the money was gone, his new marriage fell apart, and all those so-called friends he had paid off completely abandoned him, leaving him totally broke and deeply, deeply resentful.
Section 5. More than just money.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core thesis of this entire explainer. Roberta's intervention for Elmer succeeded because she provided housing, job training, mentorship, and deep human empathy. She gave him a real, solid foundation. On the flip side, the filmmakers' experiment on Ted failed drastically because they just gave him cold, hard cash with zero mandated guidance and completely unrestricted spending limits.
So the crucial reality of interventions like this is pretty clear. Cash alone is not a magic wand. It just doesn't fix underlying trauma or magically instill life skills you've never been taught. As the filmmaker who followed Ted finally realized, just providing the physical necessities like a car, a roof, a phone, it simply isn't enough to fight someone's inner demons. Real, lasting change absolutely requires mentorship, human connection, and a rock-solid foundation of financial literacy.
I want to bring our narrative full circle here with this profound quote from the father of the undercover millionaire we talked about earlier. He said, "Never measure a person's value by what they own." This was the very lesson that prompted a millionaire to live on the streets in the first place just to see who would treat him with basic human dignity when his bank account was invisible. It reminds us that our true worth is rooted in our character, our honesty, and how we treat other people, not the size of our windfall.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty heavy question to ponder today. Is money actually a reward, or is it just a magnifying glass that amplifies our existing habits, our unhealed wounds, and our level of preparation? Next time you daydream about finding a briefcase full of cash, maybe ask yourself not just what you would buy, but who you would become. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a totally new perspective on the psychology of wealth. Catch you next time.